have done that.
Okay, brilliant. So welcome to this evening's webinar hosted by Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. My name is Scott Bunce. I'm the Advocacy Manager at DWT, responsible for coordinating our relationships with local authorities and hopefully trying to influence them to make positive changes for wildlife. Just before we begin, a bit of housekeeping. Please could you keep your microphone muted unless speaking. If you want to ask a question, then please post it in the chat or raise your hands. We'll be going through each of our speakers and then going to an open Q&A, so you can sort of ask me your questions directly then if you don't want to post it directly in the chat. And then just a final thing, that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel. So if that's something that you're not entirely comfortable with, then feel free to turn off your camera. And I hope that that's okay with everyone. So just before we begin, I think it would be useful to kind of set out some of the context around why we're doing this and why we think it's important to talk about this now. So right now we're facing both a nature and a climate emergency, both of which are inextricably linked. We can't solve the biodiversity emergency without also addressing climate change and vice versa. And in fact, a third of the most cost-effective solutions to climate change could actually come from nature. Unfortunately, some of you may know, wildlife is disappearing at a truly alarming rate. The UK has become one of the most nature-depleted countries in the entire world. And we also see these trends too in Derbyshire, through the degradation of our most special types for wildlife, through the loss of space for nature, and both in the decline of species abundance and diversity. And if you'd like to sort of dig a bit more deeper into those trends, then our State of Nature report was launched last year, the first ever one, and we really dig into that at kind of a Derbyshire scale. There's lots of maps and illustrations about what that actually looks like in practice for us here in Derbyshire. On top of that, last year also saw an all-out attack on nature when the government threatened to lift the ban on fracking, introduce investment zones free of planning obligations, and remove the legislation that basically forms the basis for environmental protections in the UK via the retained EU law bill. Whilst we've won the battle on fracking for now, the government is still threatening to remove at least 570 pieces of environmental law by the end of the year without proper parliamentary scrutiny. So the national picture is challenging, and while the challenge is real, I think one of the messages that we'd like to communicate is that we can start to solve some of these issues here in Derbyshire if we let nature help. And that's through local authorities as much as anything else, because local authorities have the power to make positive changes for people and for wildlife. And that's what we want to discuss tonight. With committed individuals in place, these organisations can create an environmentally sympathetic planning system with things like the local plan, neighbourhood plans, manage their green spaces for nature, and also for the well-being of communities, and support community groups to do the same. But the reason it's opportune now is that once every 4 years, there's a chance to influence the priorities of local government and make those positive changes. So if you live in Derby, there's only one decision-making council, it's the City Council. But if you live in Derbyshire more broadly, then you can take part in elections at both town or parish council, and then also for your broader borough district. So someone living in Matlock can vote for councillors to Matlock Town Council, and then more broadly to Derbyshire Dales District Council. We have, as I said, 204 parish and town councils, 8 borough councils, 1 unitary authority. It's the biggest exercise in democracy for 4 years. And the key thing to mention here is that the alarming decline in biodiversity and the need to reverse it isn't a party political issue. It's something that we all need to take seriously, and something that all councils can address in their own backyard. So tonight, the webinar will hopefully inform you on the tools that local authorities have at their disposal and inspire some of you to stand up for nature by standing as a candidate in May. So local government has its challenges, admittedly, and definitely has its quirks. But our 3 speakers on the panel are here to hopefully demystify the system. So this evening, the speakers, the panel will talk for 5 to 10 minutes each, and then we're going to move to an open Q&A where you can ask any of us any questions. And so this evening we've got three fantastic individuals. Jamie O'Dell is the local councils officer at Hope for the Future, which is an organisation that exists to equip communities to communicate the climate emergency with their local politicians. It's based up in Sheffield, and they've supported pretty much everyone and anyone from academics, climate campaigners, faith groups, local communities, NGOs, to have their voices heard on climate change in its various forms. So Jamie's previously worked in Hope for the Future's research team, and of particular note was overseeing a research project interviewing councillors across the breadth and depth of the country. So he's got lots of juicy examples from far-flung places that we can adopt here in Derbyshire. Based in South Derbyshire, Rhiannon Fern is the driving force behind the Freeport Resident Action Group, which mobilises local people around the proposed East Midlands Intermodal Park and other matters affecting the health and well-being of residents in Etwall and Eglinton. The Intermodal Park is one of 3 sites of the East Midlands Freeport, currently being developed by the government. After gaining valuable experience in campaigning, community organising and public speaking, as well as media work, Ria felt that she could use these skills to represent her local community directly. She now sits as a local councillor on Etwall Parish Council, on top of her full-time job, campaigning through FRAG and managing a busy family life. Joining her parish council has given her a new perspective on campaigning and how the 2 commitments of being a councillor as well as a campaigner can be mutually beneficial at times where they're aligned. And last but not least, Matt Buckler isn't just Director of Natural Solutions here at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. He's also a councillor on Matlock Town Council and Derbyshire Dales. He's found that his professional experience has really helped him in his capacity as a councillor, where he's particularly involved in environmental matters as he sits on the environment committees of both. As sitting on 2 councils, he understands and he's seen firsthand how different tiers of local government can operate in harmony or in tension. But he's also seen firsthand that you don't need to be from a big council to have a big impact, and that smaller local authorities can do great things for nature, right people in place. So between them, our panel has got real breadth of experience in issues around hyper local government. And I'm really looking forward to hearing their diverse views as part of the Q&A. So as a starter for 10, there are 3 questions that I'd like to ponder as we hear from the panel in their segments. So 1, why is local government important in terms of wildlife and nature? Why does it matter really to us? 2, what difference could you make as a councillor as compared to you as a private citizen? And what knowledge and skills could you bring to the table? And 3, what knowledge and skills could you or I get back from becoming a councillor? Just a starter for 10. And to kick us off, I am going to hand over to Jamie from Hope for the Future. And Jamie, feel free to shout at me whenever I need to move your slide.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so my name's Jamie. I work for Hope for the Future. Scott has actually given a better explanation than I usually do about Hope for the Future, so I don't need to go over that. But yeah, we work nationally to support anyone who wants to engage local politicians on the climate or ecological crises. And we do this through providing long-term research and engagement supports, which is all kind of free and all kind of tailored to your engagement. So the first thing I'm going to do, if you can go to the next slide, please, Scott, is just take a broad kind of overview of local government structures in England. I spend a lot of time thinking about this or looking at this just in terms of navigating it because it is often complex. But I think one thing that really stands out for me here is how parish and town councils really kind of set the foundation of so much of kind of our local government in the UK. And often at the kind of there's a lot of kind of like filtering up between like from a parish to a district to a county level. So a lot of kind of like the real change that is really important can often start at the base of this structure and then work its way up. So I think that really kind of like hyper-local approach is really important there. And there's lots of areas that kind of district town or parish town and district councils can influence, like planning, tree cover, green spaces, working with local authorities like local flood management authorities, etc. So yeah, it's complicated, but there's lots of opportunities at in different spaces for doing lots of exciting things. Can we go to the next slide, please? So yeah, so this is just to kind of summarize what we find that Hope for the Future kind of councils and councillors can do at the most kind of like local level, and I've broken it down into influencing, advocating, and implementing, so kind of implementing policies. So first of all, kind of a role that you can have as a councillor is you can really act as a conduit and facilitator for local groups and local climate groups. So it really gives you that kind of like platform to kind of have a voice and influence, but also really work with your position, then working with local groups and acting as that kind of like conduit for people who want to make change to their local parks, to the kind of like most local level, to the communities that they live in. As I've said, kind of like then in terms of advocating, you can really kind of like be a voice. You can also, for example, looking at local plans as a consultee, like you can have that direct influence there. And you can also kind of like start to build and demonstrate like a local mandate, and you can be the voice of people who also want that change through the position that you'd have. And that kind of scales up into, again, district, county levels. Yeah. And then implementing, of course, it's not just about kind of influencing and advocating. There are kind of like direct policies that you can look at implementing. For example, parish and town and district councils are responsible for a lot of green spaces. So looking at allotments, bridleways, burial grounds, commons, open spaces, village greens, etc., mowing verges, all these kind of things. There's lots of different spaces where it's actually in the remit of the town and the parish council directly. And then again, it's the same with district councils, etc. Other things like creating local nature reserves, if the district is given the kind of the parish or town council to have that power, if it's kind of local authority owned land. So there's lots of different kind of exciting things across these 3 different areas that you could do if you were kind of a councillor at any level of local government. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is 3 things which I find are really important when kind of developing and bringing about change at a local level with councils. So the first thing, or kind of the theme throughout this, is working together, communities and councillors. The first thing is that we often find that in terms of a councillor might be really kind of wanting to kind of make a lot of progress and push on things, but often they'll need that kind of local mandate to kind of secure that change. And if you have a groundswell of organised progressive opinion behind you for a change, then that makes it a lot easier. For example, one of the main things that people get contacted about is potholes, and that's usually kind of like a negative thing. So often, if there's like positive development of local mandates for action, that can be really important, and that has wider ramifications politically too. So that's not just about influencing at a parish or town level. That can also influence the district to change policies, county, and it also has knock-on implications on MPs and then what they might advocate nationally. So there's all kind of like porous boundaries between all these different areas where working together locally and developing mandates for action is really important. Again, supporting local councillors. For example, if you're not a local councillor, then you have like specific expertise. Taking that to a council can be really powerful, can really empowering for them, because it shows exactly what you can do. And it's really useful in terms of, again, having that support, demonstrating that mandate. And again, if you're a councillor, then it's really the ones that we've interviewed have always said that it's kind of really useful when people come to me with something clear, and we can look at potentially implementing it. So I always like the kind of phrase that often like being the wind in their sails there can really help. And I think you've got a lot of potential to do that at like a hyper local level. And then lastly, yeah, being in the room, I don't think I can have stressed the importance of this enough, that being in the room, for example, as a consultee on local plans, being in the room at council meetings, etc., it gives you that voice. And if people aren't in the room, then these decisions aren't being impacted. So I think it's really important that if you have the kind of the passion, the knowledge and kind of the expertise and the desire to see that change, is that you are standing for these positions, and that with our councillors right across the kind of right across the spectrum from, again, parish, town, district, county, different levels, kind of in the room, being that voice for that change and being the voice for the local area. Can we go to the next slide, please, Scott? So this is, I quite like this quote. It's just a quote from a district councillor who we interviewed from the Labour Party. And they said that the best thing you can do to affect climate change is to do the homework for the council. So if you come to the council and say, here's our position, here's what we think you can do, here's how we can try and achieve it, here's how we can go about it, that gives the council like a really strong position. And it really kind of enables you to kind of work together. And if also you as a councillor, you're working with local climate groups, you can also develop those relationships. It can be quite symbiotic there. And I think that's something that can be really powerful and really impactful at a local level. And this isn't just something which is kind of reflected by Labour councillors. We also interviewed a what's the word, that major political party, Conservative. We interviewed a Conservative councillor he was a council leader. And they were saying that the best thing people can do is come together with small groups and come to us and say, can we do this? Can we do that? And one of the examples he was using about that was wildflower mowing, not mowing wildflowers on verges, etc. So it kind of does often boil down to that local level and kind of working together there. And then the last thing I'm just going to go run through is just some examples. If we can go to the next slide, please, Scott. So these are some examples that we've seen different areas around the country. So in Stroud, for example, one of the local councillors, actually the local councillor who was quoted in the last slide, they were talking about how they're a district councillor and they often work with local wildlife trusts and kind of nature partnerships, and they see themselves as like a conduit in ensuring that the right knowledge is in the room. So that's where you can kind of see that kind of like influencing, facilitating role as a councillor kind of coming out. Another area, Glastonbury Town Council, they were the first UK council to ban the use of pesticides in 2015. That really came out from a strong kind of like local call for that. And so they've moved to a way which is both healthier for humans and better for the environment in terms of how they manage weeding, etc. So again, that was something which the will of the local council was kind of powered through by public support and working with the councils. And then we've got two examples from Backwell Parish Council and Somerset Parish Councils, both these kind of from the Somerset area. In Backwell, they managed to achieve the withdrawing of plans to build homes on green and agricultural land. So this was an example where they were working with the local district council and they kind of applied pressure. It had already been approved, but they applied pressure to the developer kind of effectively and got the kind of plans withdrawn and reassessed. And that was kind of to build on green and good agricultural land. And that was something where the parish council was kind of like an organising body where they were able to influence that and stand up for the local area there. And another but similar kind of example is kind of across Somerset, a few parish councils came together to oppose the building of a new bypass, which is something that North Somerset District Council wanted. So that's where kind of the parish councils were able to organise at a local level against a different council too. So it's lots of different ways kind of showing how at the kind of the most hyper local level, you can really have kind of quite effective influence. And yeah, that is, I don't know if I overran, but that's my slides there.
No, that's perfect. Thanks very much, Jamie. I think that's really interesting to reflect on as we go to the Q&A. I've just started taking a few notes about the best thing people can do is do their homework, which hopefully as, I guess, you sort of passionate kind of supporters of nature, if you're at this webinar, perhaps you already are, then you might already have done that homework and kind of have a good understanding of where those steps can be. And I think these examples are really useful as well in terms of showing it how it's not just a linear process of decisions being made and going down the chain. For example, with Backwell Parish Council and with Somerset Parish Council pushing back on planning applications and planning approvals that were set at a higher tier of local authority. And that shows that actually changes can be made by local government. Not everything has to be imposed. That's the kind of the beauty of politics. Banning pesticides as well. I think maybe we can talk about that a bit later in terms of banning peat-free contracts. These are examples of all things that councils can do fairly easily, really, in terms of switching suppliers. So it's something that we can take forward into the Q&A. So thanks very much, Jamie. I think the next speaker is Ria, and we've asked Ria just to give kind of some reflections on her experience from working in the Freeport Residents Action Group and how that's kind of morphed into her becoming a councillor in her parish council. So I guess I'll hand over the floor to you, Ria, and sort of and let you speak, if that's okay.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I'm Ria. Thanks for having me here to speak. It's a real pleasure. So I live in Etwall, that's in South Derbyshire, and as Scott said, I work full time. I have two gorgeous but very energetic young children. They are probably the reason I joined Etwall Parish Council in January last year, or the main reason I joined anyway. I guess the beginning of the journey for me, albeit I've always been quite passionate about the environment and wildlife and all the things that it has brought to my life, that's been a real positive. So I've always been really passionate about trying to protect what I can in a way that I can. The journey really started in a more in-depth way when the government announced the 8 free ports in March 2021, when they announced the budget. Scott alluded to this in the introduction, but they also announced 8 Freeport sites, which now feed into what they're calling the investment zones. One of the Freeport sites is set to be on that map that's in the centre of the slide, that's displayed at the moment, which is Etwall/Eggington Common. So because it's so near to me, it obviously made it a really good, in inverted commas, opportunity for me to kind of get involved on a deeper level. So I set up Freeport Resident Action Group. It was mainly a campaign to raise awareness and share information. I was really worried that there was a real lack of awareness about what the Freeport was and what it would mean for the community and all the effects that it would bring with it. So I set up the campaign originally for that reason, but I ended up quite quickly getting communications with some of the major players. So I managed to communicate directly with Toyota. I communicated face-to-face, had face-to-face meetings with Severn Trent, who were the ones who the landowners and obviously would be selling the land to the developers. I had debates on BBC Politics East Midlands with Heather Wheeler, and I had another debate with Ben Bradley as well shortly after that on BBC Politics East Midlands. We even ended up getting a slot on BBC East Midlands today, which was a bit of a surprise, but it was a bonus to kind of get the awareness out there. So through the campaign, it just kind of spiraled really. Obviously I had the passion and the drive there and really cared about understanding more. So I started to communicate with the parish council, with Etwall Parish Council, to further the awareness in the community, I guess, was my main aim. And when I started communicating with them, so attending the meetings and emailing them, I was really quite surprised at the lack of awareness. And I'll have to be honest with you all and say, when I originally started communicating, I wasn't really sure what a parish council was and what they did, what their role was. That's how naive I was to the whole thing at the time. And yes, I was really surprised at again the lack of awareness. So my motive was to say to the parish council, can you communicate about the Freeport and what it means for the community to the community, and how do you think we should do that? And the question kind of got threw back at me in a, we don't know, what do we do and how do we do it? So that led me really to join the parish council, because there was obviously a gap there and an opening for somebody to I guess to get running with it from a Freeport point of view especially, but also from an environmental point of view. I thought perhaps there's a gap there that I could fill in terms of bringing environmental awareness up on the agenda and list of priorities for this particular parish council. I had the passion, I had loads of reasons to join, I had the energy, probably didn't have the time, but the passion and the energy was probably enough. So I did join in January last year. I joined the parish council, and I wanted to communicate on this call really the things that I've managed to achieve since joining the parish council, which once I started making a list for this call, realised just how much it had helped really in terms of the campaign, but also in terms of the community's awareness of the Freeport. So since I joined January last year, we've done a door drop leaflet to every house in the community about the Freeport to raise awareness of what it is and what it will mean. It's a permanent agenda item on the parish council agenda, so it's constantly there to be talked about and updated. We've managed to recruit a planning consultant ready for when we've got more details of the Freeport, who's going to help us hopefully look at mitigation and for the impact. I also got involved in, not directly relate, well, it is directly related to the Freeport, but I was able to get involved in the parish council's response to the local plan. And a lot of that response was heavily weighted towards the environment and wildlife. And I also managed to get some responses in about the Freeport as well. So I think I was really, really pleased to be part of that response and able to make the environment and the wildlife impacts a much bigger part of our response as a result of me being a parish councillor. I've also instigated, and I'm now a lead for a neighbourhood plan for Etwall. So I've got the ball rolling for us to create a neighbourhood plan, which will hopefully bring in some environmental protections as well. I'm also the lead for a development that's in Etwall that's happening at the moment, and encouraging the parish council to be monitoring and communicating about the environmental impacts of that development. A lot of the work I've done has just been about talking more about our environment and our responsibility to the wildlife, and just looking for those opportunities within the parish council to bring that higher up on the agenda, and that's been really, really positive. So yeah, I think in terms of my campaigning, the parish councils, I think originally when I set up the Freeport Resident Action Group, I hoped that a community voice would be enough. But I think since joining the parish council, I've realised that it's opportunities to talk to different people and go down different avenues and communicate in a different way, which just means that there's more noise created on the whole. So it's mutually beneficial from my experience so far, and so I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks very much, Ria. And that is superhuman childcare managing at the same time. Hello.
Sorry about that.
No, that's brilliant. No, that's fine. That's the world we live in, isn't it? So I think it's I think what's really great about Ria is that she wasn't someone who's necessarily hugely involved in politics necessarily, and then she found something that she's really passionate about, identified a gap, and has managed to kind of leverage that and sort of snowballed a little bit, which probably has its negatives for your personal life as much as positives, but it's shown kind of how you don't need to be really invested in party politics or local politics to start to get involved in local affairs like this. So I think also it's great to hear about your experience in debating with MPs on the BBC as well. I mean, that's quite an experience, and I'm sure that experience in kind of debating is will probably stand you in great stead in terms of the future, and in terms of the parish council as well. I think there's probably lots more that we could actually ask you, Ria, but I think I'm going to wait until the Q&A, and then we'll come back to that. I think the other thing I wrote down was I really liked how you talked about at the end there about how it's being on the parish council has helped you create a lot more noise around the Freeport Residents Action Group, and it's helped amplify the work that you've done and so many other things in terms of the neighbourhood plan and the developments. So I think it's really fantastic example, and thank you for sharing it. Really appreciate it. And in the interest of time, I am going to hand over now just to Matt to give us 5 or 10 minutes of his experience as a councillor on Matlock Town Council, and Derbyshire Dales District Council. That's a picture of you, Matt, looking a little bit younger and sort of quite hirsute there. So I'm not. That's sorry about using that picture. And I've asked Matt just to give a kind of a couple of reflections about kind of bringing his own professional expertise into the role of being a councillor, and also what it means to sit across multiple levels of local government. So Matt, I will hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Scott. As Scott said, I'm Matt Buckler. I'm the Director of Natural Solutions at the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. And I've always been sort of interested in politics. My first attempt at politics was as a 12-year-old in the 1982 general election, standing for our school council for our school election. Didn't go down well, but it's improved since then. So the photo there is of me standing in the general election in 2019. And why did I start doing this? So I have always thought that people make decisions, and I'm a person, therefore why shouldn't I be participating in making decisions? And if I don't like the decisions that people are making, what am I going to do about it? If I don't do anything about it, who else is going to do it? And I can't expect anybody else to do it if I won't. And so that was sort of my rationale behind doing this sort of stuff. My previous job, I worked for the National Park Authority, and so I couldn't become a councillor. So I stood to be the MP. Then I joined Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, so I could become a councillor, and so I stood. My plan was to learn how councils work at Matlock Town Council. Basically, they work the same. Parish councils and the district councils have all got standing orders, and you go through all these processes. And my plan was to come second in my ward at the district council to build on for the next election. That plan didn't work because I got elected. I won by one vote, and at every council meeting since, the number of people who come up to me afterwards and say it was my vote that won it, and you think it was absolutely your vote, and that's the same for everybody. The thing that I think about when I sit there in the council chamber is that I won by one vote, and my vote in the council is as good as anybody else's. And so, it's recognizing that your voice, recognizing your voice and what you're standing there for is really important. And Scott asked me to say a couple of things. He said you could quite happily talk about this for an hour and a half. So answer these questions. So I'm going to answer these questions. And so, thinking about the things that I've done at Matlock Town Council and Derbyshire Dales. So we have put through a peat-free and pesticide-free motions at Matlock Town Council, and sort of moving away from bedding plants and things like that to much more sustainable planting. Within 6 weeks of me joining Derbyshire Dales, we passed a climate emergency motion, which we've now got climate change officers, and we're doing really good stuff. We've got a biodiversity working group on the district council, which I sit on, and we've been doing really good work on road verges. Derbyshire County Council regarded us as sort of exemplars of road verge management. There's still a long way to go. It's much more complicated than you think. And one of the things that you realise when you're working with district council is that the sort of scale of it is quite significant. As part of the biodiversity working group, I put forward a biodiversity motion, so that the district council, asking the district council to recognise all this stuff, and that happened earlier this year. And so, there should be good work coming off of that. But one of the good things about working in the district council and the district council wards that I work in is that I not only work with Matlock Town Council, so I'm elected onto Matlock Town Council, but I also work with parish councils in my ward. So I work with parish councils for Roseley, Northwood and Tinkersley, Stanton in Peak, and Birchover. And, you know, and so I get to go and talk to all of those parish councils, and they're all very different. They still got to go through the same processes, but I've done things like funded a Swift Box project in Roseley, and Northwood and Tinkersley's biodiversity project. You know, and it's been great working with that parish council on the work that they're doing. You know, they're doing so much stuff, and I think that having somebody to listen to has been really helpful for them. And I think the key thing is that people have had to listen to me talking about nature, and decision makers have to listen to me talking about nature, because I'm a decision maker, and people just have to listen to you. And so the other thing that Scott asked me to talk about is what people should do, and what do parish and district councils do. I think, you know, I really rate the work that parish councils do. I think that I really rate the opportunities that there are to do things by working with parish councils. You know, as Ria said, you know, that lots of parish councils do neighbourhood plans. You know, neighbourhood plans are fantastic things, and you know, you're not going to stop every housing development with a neighbourhood plan, but you are going to be able to have an impact on it. You know, you can put things in there like, this is the amount of open space we want. This is the amount of green infrastructure. This is how we would like to see our green infrastructure work. This is how, you know, this is a really important part of our community, and so we don't want that to be developed. And that can have a really positive impact if it's not an allocated site. So you can feed into the local plan, which is a much bigger thing, but neighbourhood plans are really good. I think the thing that people don't realise about parish councils get their funding from a thing called the precept. District councils are limited to how much they're allowed to put up council tax. Parish councils are not. Parish councils can put their council tax up by whatever amount they want. They're generally quite small, but if you go to a parish council and say that you want to do a biodiversity project, you know, there is every possibility of them being able to fund that by working with your community and raising your precept to do that. You know, there's much more flexibility at parish council level than there is at either county council level or at district council level. And I think, you know, I think one of the other things is that at parish council meetings, you know, which some places happen once a month, some places happen once every 2 months, is that you can just talk about it. So just go along and talk about nature and talk about how this thing relates to this thing that they're talking about, whether that's bins, recycling, planning permissions which have been requested, how that relates to nature. Because most people are actually interested about it. It just doesn't enter their minds that there's something they can do about it. And so if you go along and bring it back to that, bring it back to nature, people will always respond to you well. And that, you know, that just means that those decisions get embedded in councils. You know, if people don't go and talk about it, then it's, you know, it will be people talking about, you know, football pitches or dog walking areas, or because that's what they're interested in. So go and talk about it, and it will become what your parish council gets known for. You know, parish councils get the opportunity to talk about every planning application that goes in. If you don't like it, you know, talk to the parish council. The parish council can, obviously, you can respond to the consultation yourself. At the parish council, they'll bring that to you and talk to you about it, and it gives you an opportunity to sort of really flag stuff up. And I think the critical thing to do is to be relentlessly optimistic. You know, you just have to go and not give up, and just keep banging on about it all the time. That's what I wanted to say. Thanks, Scott.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Amazing. I've got a few things there that we can take forward to the Q&A. Decision makers need to listen to me talk about nature because I'm a decision maker. Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely right. And being relentlessly optimistic, that's really, really important messages, I think, to take forward. Because I am sharing my screen, I cannot see if anyone has been asking my questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to see if anyone has been saying anything in the chat. I'm going to kick us off actually though, just to get the ball rolling with you, Matt, seeing as you have just been talking. And if you could distill things down to sort of what would be the one priority for a parish or town council and a borough and district council regarding the environment or biodiversity or planning, starting from a low baseline, what should that priority for action be?
Know what you've got. So identify what it is you've got and how things work, how things connect up, and look to your neighbourhood plan. See if you have got a neighbourhood plan. If you haven't got a neighbourhood plan, then start working towards one.
Well, okay, right. Does anyone? I'm going to keep on asking questions if someone else doesn't ask a question. So I can't see any hands raised. No. Okay, I'm going to ask another question of Ria then. Sorry, Ria, if you're available. No, I'll go to Jamie then. Jamie, so we a lot of people live in echo chambers nowadays, and to some extent, everyone that's here might be living, you could argue, might live in a bit of an echo chamber. How does someone who's really worried about the climate and nature emergencies kind of engage with their decision makers who might not, even if you decide not to stand for council, but you still want to get involved and you want to engage in your decision maker, how can you best communicate and engage with them when they might not be as passionate about it as the rest of us are?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's this is a lot of what we address in the kind of the training and support that we provide to constituents. I'd say there's two pillars for it. First of all is research. So it's kind of having absolute kind of confidence in both what you're talking about and what you kind of want to see, having those kind of like really specific things that you can say, okay, this is what I'd like to take forward. And then from that research comes, you can kind of identify areas of common ground, because you're not just researching what you want to talk about, but you're also researching who you're going to talk to. Now that's easier kind of at a bigger level, like an MP, for example, because there's a lot about them online, etc. But doing some initial research into district councils, what they want to do, or like parish councils, what's in local plans, etc. And then also the council that you want to talk to. I'd always say that it can be really, really small, it can be really, really wide, but there'll be some area kind of where your interests and their interests will overlap. And I'd say kind of like start with that. Also, because I always think engaging with politicians can be quite daunting sometimes. But the beauty of local politics is that councillors are much more accessible. They're much more just kind of, you're much more likely to see them in the local pub, for example, than you are your local MP, etc. So either just kind of like find your local ward council and just have a conversation saying, just find out things. You don't have to kind of go in expecting kind of all the different answers, etc. But just say, well, what about this? I want to know more about that. So kind of start at that really local level there and just have a nice conversation with someone and start building that relationship. And that's where those areas of common ground will start emerging there as well. So yeah, I think kind of seeing it as a long-term process and just doing that research kind of iteratively and finding those areas of common ground if you don't think someone's going to be supportive of you. And yeah, find councillors too, like Matt and Ria, and then they can kind of help point you in different directions and kind of, I think, take the fear out of those engagements.
Brilliant, thanks, Jamie. I've just seen your message in the chat that that Pam had a question, so we'll come to you, Pam, and then we'll come to Pauline after that.
This isn't so much a question as where I live, there is no parish council. All the other areas have got parish council, so I suppose the next tier for me would be Ripley Town Council.
So you're within the boundaries of Ripley?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's probably more difficult to get to a town council than it would be starting off with a parish council. Why this area doesn't have a parish council, I don't know, but that's the way it seems to be at the moment.
Yeah,
I've only been here 6 years, so I don't know what the history is.
Yeah, in Derbyshire, isn't a long time, is it? You'll be a local in 20 years.
I'll be dead by then.
Yeah. Well, okay. Sorry about that.
Town councils are parish councils, so legally a town council is a parish council, and so it's there will be fewer members for there are fewer representatives on a town council than there are in a parish council, because you're like to be only one person. There's only like to be one councillor from each ward. But quite often you probably won't need to stand. I didn't need to stand for Matlock Town Council. Because I was elected unopposed for Matlock Town Council. So it may well be it may well be worth investigating whether you could stand as an independent for your ward on Ripley Town Council, because it may well be that there isn't a bigger group.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for saving me from myself. Pauline.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question coming back to Freeports, please. I live in Derby City, and it feels to me like I have no democratic say whatsoever over what's happening on our doorstep. It feels like the Freeports are going to expand all over the place. I understand there's so very little on their website. And it looks like a 20-mile radius from East Midlands Airport is going to be covered one way or another with various developments to do with the Freeport. And that has to have an effect on people in very many authorities. I've asked questions at Derby City Council and get nothing but bland responses about, oh, it's all going to be beneficial because we're going to get more jobs and all of this. And it doesn't feel like we have any control whatsoever over what is going on. And I am standing as a councillor, by the way. I am standing for Derby City Council, so I am trying to do my bit too. But I'd just like to know how we can actually do more, not just from poor Etwall that's already being very much affected, but whether Ria's got any ideas how the rest of us that are also going to be affected one way or another can actually help her in her fight.
Yeah, would you like to?
Yeah, sorry, took me a second to unmute. Thanks, Pauline, for your question. Yeah, it's really, really worrying. I'm totally with you. I think the investment zones span, you're quite right, they're 28 miles from each Freeport zone. So that will mean we'll see commercial buildings popping up within those 28-mile radiuses. I dread to think how many will be popping up, because obviously they're incentivized by the low tariffs, the no stamp duty land tax, and all the rest of the incentives they get to build in those investment zones. So it's really, really worrying. I think the one thing I would say is that you said that, there's other people worried about it and are concerned. That's really positive, because people need to just keep talking about it. That's what my main aim for the campaign was, to get people talking about this issue and communicating about it, because like you said, there's very little communication coming top down. There's very little communication from the government. In fact, in Etwall, we're struggling to get any communication from even the developers, and we were supposed to have meetings every 6 weeks, and it's just not been happening. So there's really little information coming top down. So I think the only thing we can do really is keep talking about it, keep communicating, and join forces wherever we can. So you know, join my group on Facebook or join my mailing list, and encourage others to do the same, because the more noise we generate about it, the more positive it will be. So I'm really sorry about my little girl. I'm not sure where my childcare has gone, but she's
fine.
enjoying it anyway.
That's fine,
I hope that
absolutely.
answers your question.
That's brilliant. Do you want to drop your details maybe into the chat, actually, Ria, in terms of the Facebook group and mailing list? That I think that might be quite useful. And just to add to that, I think the officials might have an interest in giving bland answers, because lack of awareness is the real issue, isn't it? So, you know, that's why we get such bland answers back and such little public information. One thing to say as well, Pauline, is that the Derby City Council local plan review starts this year, doesn't it? So there might be some scope through that to make stipulations about to have a specific policy around the Freeport. I know in the South Derbyshire local plan review recently, they had a consultation and they asked respondents whether or not they should have a specific policy on the East Midlands Freeport. So I think getting something similar to that in the local plan for Derby City would be quite valuable potentially. Does that answer your question? Yeah,
thank you. I have put my name on a list to be consulted when the local plan started. I thought they were starting months ago, but I've heard nothing yet. But I am on a list. I'm supposed to be one of the people that's being kept in the loop when they start the local planning.
So they're currently doing kind of the internal like evidence review, and then there'll be a public consultation, like early autumn, I would imagine. So they're doing the internal this year before going out publicly, and probably in the autumn. These things get pushed back and back, don't they? I think Christine, I think you had your hand up first. You're on mute, Christine. If I can unmute you.
Okay, sorry, I live in Durbridge and I founded a climate action group 2 years ago, and we live about 26 miles away in the catchment area, and I'm sure it's going to affect us. We have a very busy and increasingly busy A50 within a mile of the village, and it would be good, Ria, if we could liaise and join your Facebook, or have a look at your Facebook group, please, if you could put it up on the chat. And I'd just like to mention also that as regards that we did our neighbourhood plan in 2018, and it desperately needs bringing up to date now in accordance with the climate and biodiversity emergency. And I think that we need to talk about that to the council. Also, we've had 2 big estates come to the village in the last 5 years. Unfortunately, we did talk to the developers about zero carbon housing and solar panels, grey water harvesting, etc., etc. They did a bit of extra insulation, but that was it. And I went down and lobbied my MP about it in 2019 at the lobby. But it's just still not happening. Although we've no hedgehog highways, we've no swift boxes. The housing is nowhere near zero carbon, and we desperately need it to be. And I don't know how much influence our neighbourhood plan, even if we get it updated, is going to influence what developers do. Because, you know, if we have planning regulations taken away, and they're not very good on the environment at the moment anyway, and on passive house housing, then I don't know how much our neighbourhood plan is going to influence, but we can only but try. Thank you.
In terms of biodiversity element, that might be something that we can help with. If you get in contact with us, then we can discuss that. The other thing to mention just about neighbourhood plans is that Natural England just released a whole load of guidance about green infrastructure, and specifically how local authorities, how neighbourhood planning groups can adopt all this work that Natural England has done as a statutory body on incorporating those standards around green infrastructure into local plans, into neighbourhood plans. And I will also try and post that in the chat now for you. But if you'd like to have further conversations about updating the biodiversity element, with some support from us, then yeah, get in contact with us.
Thank you.
Jonathan. Yeah, hiya.
Hello, it's Jonathan and I'm Amina. I'm just sort of wanted to connect really with Pam. Hi Pam, we're also in Ripley and we're standing for Ripley Town Council, Heege Ward. So if you wanted to connect and, you know, chat, we're happy to do that. But yeah, I mean, similar concerns. We're obviously worried that, you know, our area is being covered in unnecessary and unwanted housing and factory developments, and nature is being destroyed by certain local developers. I say developers, but I suppose I want to know who do we ask for biodiversity reports from Derbyshire Wildlife Trust? I mean, I'm a volunteer in the shop at Belper, but there's still a lot really I don't understand about the structure of Derbyshire Wildlife Trust and what you can offer to sort of to report on the state of nature in our area, because we do have, we've got peregrine falcons, we've got barn owls that have been killed, we've got badgers that have been killed, stoats, martins, all sorts of wildlife has been actually killed, herons lost their homes. So what can we do? A lot of the people, our neighbours, are very worried about the animals that have been killed and are dying because of the developments, and what can we do about it?
So I think maybe we could, Matt, if you want to jump in here, then feel free. I think in terms of, we run the record centre in Derbyshire. So in terms of logging what's currently there, the best way that we can stop things happening in the long term is to know what's been lost through our record centre. So I'm not sure how, thanks for posting at that. So if in terms of, I'd say that's probably the best place to start, is that's how we can build an argument that's data-based, that says this is what we used to have, it's not here anymore, it's not good enough. In terms of enhancing biodiversity, in terms of plans, I think from that, just to reiterate, from a neighbourhood plan, that's something that we do offer. Do you feel that your request, you just maybe sort of clarify, do you feel that there's not enough, you don't understand what we can do in terms of helping communities, in terms of community groups?
So I suppose it's sort of after the event, or, you know, when a planning report goes in by a developer, and sometimes we see Derbyshire Wildlife Trust have put in a report. So I suppose we'd like to know more about how those reports are developed and brought about. But sort of talking about the local plans, unfortunately, the local plans haven't been approved. So the current administration haven't approved them. And until they do, it's a building free-for-all.
Matt, do you want to touch on what our role in the planning system is?
Yeah, and I can say about my understanding of the local plans as well. So we have, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust have service level agreements with all of the local planning authorities in Derbyshire. And we basically, they don't, we've got one, we've got an overall planning advice sort of system for all of the local authorities. So rather than them having biodiversity officers, they contribute to the local planning advice that we provide. And I think the key thing to say about that, you know, my team who do that know an awful lot about an awful lot of places, and can talk to you. We'll talk to you in quite a lot of detail about quite a lot of places, which, you know, which is sort of incomprehensible, really. But actually, what they're dependent on is is the records that go into the record centre. So I put in an email address on before the stuff about the record centre. You know, notifying us of things that you've seen is critically important to affect the impact of, you know, to be able to have a positive impact in terms of planning outcomes. So, you know, it's really, really, really important that the record centre gets as many records as it can, with as much detail as possible. And so if you look on that page on the record centre website, on the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust website about the record centre, it will tell you how to submit records. And you can find out the species that are really useful in terms of planning applications. You know, we have conversations with people about from protected species stuff like bats and great crested newts, you know, all the way up to, you know, to the impact of how important sites are because they're local wildlife sites. If you haven't got a local plan, it is really difficult. Because it is a planning free-for-all, and I think that there's a really good opportunity. You know, all of these things, all of these failings which we're spotting are actually really good things to be getting your councillors to commit to at an election. You know, so you haven't got a local plan, you know, there is a party, whoever's in control of your council has not put through the local plan. You know, be emailing all councillors to say, what are you going to do to commit to getting a local plan, because currently we've got a planning free-for-all. You know, all of these things, which goes back to the thing about being relentlessly optimistic. All of these things are opportunities for you to put pressure on people where people have failed to do things in ways that you want them to happen. It's a really good opportunity for you to put pressure on them to do something about it.
We are sadly overrun what I initially advertised this time slot as. So I think if I will take any sort of final questions, and then I think we'll start to wrap up. I'm annoyed, to be honest, because I had reams of questions for each of them. I was going to go full Paxton in all of them. Unfortunately, you guys have all had such brilliant questions. I've not had the opportunity to do that. But please, if you do have more questions after this that you think you'd like to know more of, then let us know, and I can make sure that they receive them, and we can go from there. So I need to wind up. I'm sorry, I need to wind up to kind of closing remarks, and but I think I'd just like to reiterate that I think I've said it at the beginning, and I'll say it again, that taking action for nature is non-partisan, and we'd encourage everyone to get involved in driving positive change. So great to hear that, Pauline, you're going to be standing. If anyone else would like to know more about in terms of what are the resources for councillors in terms of maybe like council toolkits, there's actually a lot out there. It's just there's not very much information or accessibility always. So let get in touch. You can contact us in our general inquiries email, or you can stay on to this webinar for a few minutes extra after everyone's gone. You can chat to me and you can get my contact details. Even if you think that this year is not the year for you, then I hope that you will consider supporting DWT's election campaign, which we're launching next month with a series of manifesto asks that we hope all candidates will endorse, specifically around the environment and wildlife. So look out for future communications about that. With that, the last thing to say is obviously, please remember to bring photo ID to the booth, to the voting booth. That's the biggest changes that we've seen in some time. So hopefully no one gets caught out by that new rule. And I think all that remains is to thank you very much for coming and for taking part on a Thursday evening. And have a good evening, and thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.